it is an honor hosting you, Aditya. This is our second collab. The first one being the TSD Empower, a Women's Day event that we collaborated for. And this event today, where we would typically, we have prepared a bunch of questions for you that we'll be basically asking you. And I'm sure that the wisdom that you'll be sharing across with us will go a long way in impacting the entrepreneurial journeys of the Indian entrepreneurs. So without much ado, let's start today's session. A quick introduction about Aditya. Aditya Arora, fondly known as the Faad guy, CEO of Faad Network, a leading VC company in India, having invested in more than 60 startups in 3 years. Aditya has won prestigious awards like Parliamentary, Meritorious Award, United Nations, Karamveer, Chakra, and Young Nominee. He's one of the youngest nominees for Padma Shri. When I personally did a quick research about Aditya, one thing that stuck in my mind was he's someone who started his journey with the Faad Network as an intern, and today he's the CEO of the company. So there's definitely a lot of things on that aspect also, I'm sure Aditya will share. But more or less, we'll be sticking to the topic today, which is implementing lean startup principles. So a very warm welcome, Aditya, on behalf of the entire community. And for the entire community, thank you for joining us today in this wonderful morning. For our audience on LinkedIn and the members joining in today, a very warm welcome and thank you so much for joining in for this session. All right, Aditya, coming to you, a warm welcome. Please, opening lines from you. Tell us about your journey, how it has been before we, quickly dive into the topic.
Thanks a lot, Amrit, for the kind introduction. And thank you to everybody who has joined in. This means a lot. Of course, whatever we'll discuss today, I think I always enjoy my conversation with entrepreneurs, with the ecosystem. So yeah, looking forward to this discussion around lean startup, a topic that is extremely close to my heart, being an early stage investor. So yeah, let's dig into it right away.
Yes. So let's set the context for the session today. My first question towards you, Aditya, would be let's provide everyone the overview of lean startup methodology and why is it important for early stage entrepreneurs to adopt this approach.
Got it. So lean startup methodology is more of a scientific way of testing out your product, right? In different phases. So it basically drives customer engagement, customer interaction, to make significant changes in your product so that the customer needs are met. So essentially, how we talk about this is, to simplify it down, we talk about this from a loop, right? So there's a build, there's a measure, and there's a learn. So when you're building a product, right, you're building it eventually for customers. When you build it out for customers, you try to measure data from it. Data could be in any form, let's say customer acquisition, data could be revenue, data could be, let's say, touch points of customers, data could be, let's say, repeat customers that are coming and buying your product again and again. And then basis that you learn new ideas to make improvements in your product. So this is how a lean startup methodology works, where rather than going out and of course, spending significant amounts of money in market research and product development, you essentially do it in a very lean manner through real-time direct customer engagements.
Lovely. What sticks with me is the whole process of build, measure, and learn. Some practical steps that you would recommend or that entrepreneurs can take to implement the principles of lean startup methodology in their own ventures.
Got it. So essentially, see, lean startup methodology, the best part about it is the framework would be used in practically every industry. So you are either building a product or either you are building a service. These are the only two options that are available in front of us. So in case if let's say you are building either of them, product or service, your first step is to, whenever you're building this out, the first step is to, of course, talk to the customers and see what exactly problem you're solving. Because everything in startup is all about solving a problem for the customer, right? So basis that you develop a prototype or let's say a very first basic level version of the product, which is also called as MVP or the minimum viable proposition. Basis that, right, then you sort of go ahead, you test out your MVP, If it's a technical product or a technical service, the MVP could last for, let's say, many, many months. But if it's, let's say, a more consumer facing direct consumer retail kind of product, the MVP could last, let's say, lesser than months. You test it out. The idea is not to actually make money, right? Lean startup methodology, the money is never mentioned in the framework. The idea is to get customer feedback. So if you develop a product or whatever service, a prototype, you test it out with your customers, you get what the feedback you are getting. Basis that you improve the product and then go back to the market again, right? So it's not about just talking to the customer once, developing it and just moving ahead and commercializing. Whatever product or service you're building in your own very startups, you go back to the market again, take another feedback, and basis that, once you convert the customer to a final customer, that's when you start charging, and that's when you start monetizing more and more of the customer. So this is how practically you can do lean startup in your whatever ventures you are building.
Lovely. So, money is not the priority. It's about getting the product right, getting the feedback from the customers is more critical. So talking about, the MVP stage and trying to get the product right, how can early stage startups effectively conduct rapid experiments to validate their ideas and hypotheses? Any examples would, really help.
So I'll take example of this company called Zopos. So Zopos was an online shoe company, right? Practically, it was launched in before 2000, early, like late 1999, right? Company was launched when Nike was started, but was of course already at its peak, right? Now Zopos basically was trying to sell shoes online, but of course we know that before 2000, selling shoes online was not an idea, right? Because Amazon came in way later, right? So essentially, Zopos, what they did, they went to local stores, right? They clicked photographs of shoes from the local stores and put it online. People started ordering online, but since Zopos did not have any inventory, they used to go back to the local stores, purchase the shoe at the full price, right? And then deliver it to the customer at a discounted price. They used to take the hit, right? Because again, money was not the priority for them. Their priority was to test out the hypothesis that whether selling shoes online could become a concept or not. And through this, they actually validated their concept for 2 or 3 years and then became a $1 billion online shoe selling industry, right? Company. So essentially, how do you conduct rapid experiments is all about testing out first what your hypothesis is, right? First is to state what your hypothesis is. Are you testing for a feature of the product or are you testing the whole concept, right? Once you state your hypothesis, your next step is to effectively consider what is your target segment or your target audience whom you test out your hypothesis with. Whether it would be online retailers, whether it would be young adults, whether it would be late stage parents, whatever, right? So then you develop your thesis. And the third step is figuring out the channels through which you'll reach out to your TG, right? So let's say if I'm talking about young adults, right? People from ages of 18 to 24, now they're mostly active on social media platforms, right? So my eventual channel of acquisition would become a social media outreach or social media acquisition, right? If I'm talking about the late adults, it's mostly a direct to direct contact that would happen. That could be a more face touch point that you could set up. So when you define your TG, you define the ways you have to reach out. The final step in the coffin is to test out what will you test your hypothesis on. You stated your hypothesis that whether it's selling shoes online. Now, the end result is to define that what will complete your hypothesis, right? So if let's say I get 7 customer orders, my hypothesis gets tested, right? Or if I get 10 people to stick with my product or 10 people to reorder my product or service, I effectively test my hypothesis. And that's how you rapidly conduct experiments, by stating your thesis, by defining your TG, reaching out defining how would you reach out to your TG, and then specifying the end result that you eventually want to get your hypothesis to be true. So that is what.
So, the word rapid is pretty broad in terms of interpretation, right? Hypothesis and validating it, course correcting it, or improvising it. I think that's a ongoing process until you get the product market fit. But in the community or in the larger diaspora of entrepreneurs across India, there has been this problem of patience in terms of how long does it take to close one loop and then test out some other loop and then test out some other loop. Do you think that's a problem, and how can that be understood?
So the actual thing is that attaining a PMF journey or attaining a product satisfaction in the minds of customers is a never-ending process, right? because if you set out a time, right, the eventual decision is not in your hands but the hands of customer. If the customer does not say that, okay, I'm willing to buy this product or service, or I'm accepting this new feature change in the product, your eventual goal is still not met, right? Because you're not selling it for yourself, you're selling it for the customer. So it's a never-ending cycle, this build, measure, learn feedback loop. Even after you have attained PMF, still it is continuous. Because PMF, if you have attained, that does not mean that it may not go out. Let's say if a customer comes in, if a competitor comes in tomorrow with a slash down pricing, with a better feature enhanced on the production, with more muscle power to sell the product, you are still again in that PMF discovery phase where you're thinking, how should I re-establish a new PMF, right? So this is a never-ending cycle because product has to go through a continuous iteration journey, and that's how it should be as well. If your product is stabilized at one point of time, that means that either A, you have satisfied all the customers, which is practically not possible, or B, it means that you're still not innovating over time. So a perfect example of it is Kodak, right? Kodak, when it came out with its, of course, Polaroid cameras, right, established PMF, probably $1 million in revenue, lakhs of customers. But then when they were not able to sort of re-establish a new PMF when digital cameras came in, right, Kodak went out of market. So PMF is never a one state destination. It's always an ever evolving journey where you're moving from one product, one stage of the product to the other.
Very well said, Aditya. It's not just that the startup in the early stage has to go through the product market fit cycle. It is, I think, the startups and the big names 10 years into the business are still introducing new products, finding ways to monetize, and are having a similar kind of a phase that an early stage startup typically goes through. But then, yeah. All right. So talking about the rapid experimentation, pivoting is a very crucial part, which comes with the whole process, right? So having a hypothesis in place and then either validating it or course correcting it, pivoting is a challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs who often get connected with the approach than the vision that they are trying to achieve. So what advice would you have for such entrepreneurs who are facing challenges in pivoting in their business models based on customer feedback and market insights, and how they can navigate this process effectively?
So essentially, pivot is looked at as a very negative word sometimes also, which I don't believe it is true, because pivot is sometimes the need of the hour before you go down the drain. If you're not essentially pivoting, you are not evolving with the demand of the market, or essentially you're not innovating. And pivots also happen in multiple spaces, right? As you said, one could be a business model pivot. The other could be, let's say, a product pivot, right? One could be, let's say, a target market pivot, right? Where I'm not essentially changing my target market altogether, right? So pivots is very necessary, but the timing of pivot is even more necessary, right? Once you have a sticky customer base which is reordering, maybe pivoting at the middle of that journey is sometimes it would not be feasible, because that means you're killing your own customers, right? But then if, let's say, you're not even getting any sort of repetition orders on it, you're not getting any revenue, your customers are flocking to another similar product or service in the market, that means that, of course, something is not going well with you. And at that point in time, if you delay the decision of pivot by even a few days, right, that means that essentially whatever first mover advantage or whatever competitive differentiation you had, you are basically killing that own competitive differentiation or product first mover advantage, right? So A is to identify where do you have to pivot, because sometimes it's not just the pivot in the product, but it is a pivot in, let's say, reaching out to customers also, right? And pivot is just a change in strategy. It does not have to mean a 180-degree pivot. So whenever I talk to the companies that I invest in, I talk about two kinds of pivot. One is a 180-degree pivot and one is a 0-degree pivot, right? When I talk about a 180-degree pivot, that means essentially we are changing our course correction altogether. If it's a 360-degree pivot, that means you're changing the entire business altogether. If it's a 0-degree pivot, that means that we are doing just basic course correction and we're not actually changing the actual landscape of the product or service or the essential business model, right? So these kind of pivots are more welcome and in fact the need of the hour, because startups in India are now, of course, growing by volume. So you have practically unicorns in every space now, right? So you have to make certain pivots, identify what kind of pivots are there, test out your pivots also over some point of time through this lean startup methodology. Don't pivot entirely, right? All at front, right? So test that out in cohorts and thesis, right? And then essentially make a final change in your product or service depending upon what your customers.
Right. I think more needs to be spoken about this. Just a mention about it is left to the interpretation of the audiences that, pivot is seen as a negative approach that startups take. And I think it's more of a part of the cycle that we are into, right? In the beginning, the product market fit cycle and what we're trying to achieve. So in your experience, what are the most common mistakes or misconceptions that entrepreneurs have or they make in terms of mistakes when applying lean startup methodology, and how can they overcome these challenges?
I think the most easily visible challenge that I see in all kind of startups that I get is the time to market in products is too high, right? Where essentially startups, I feel today that most of the startups I interact with are taking longer times to produce their product to launch it in the market. Now doing that eventually increases your working cycle and increasing your revenue cycle also. So lean startup is basically saying that make your product journey in parts. Don't develop full of the product from day zero, right? Develop it in parts, test it out in parts, measure your data in parts, and that's how you move towards your final journey. So first mistake that I see is where you're taking too much time to deliver the product. The startups are saying, if I launch it in the market, that has to be the final product. But essentially that's not true. Any startup, any product that you launch it always has a version 1, version 2, version 3, version N attached. I think that's the first thing. Second is, I think, more of the target setting, right? Where startups know what their product, what problem they're solving, but they're failing to understand essentially who are the bearers of this problem. Is it like, because a problem could be multifaceted, right? Like, let's say, for example, we talk about health. Health is something which a young adult, or let's say somebody who's in late 70s also would vary about, right? But who exactly is your core target audience? What is the obtainable market target audience which you are capturing, right? Either you are capturing lifestyle diseases of people in which happen post 50, or either you're talking about premature lifestyle diseases which happen in your childhood, because that would differentiate and dissect your TG, right? So slicing and dicing of your data and slicing and dicing of your target audience is extremely important. You can't test out your product to a wrong audience and then launch it out for them. So that's the second mistake. And yeah, since we're talking about power of 3, I think third mistake I'll probably talk about is too much time in taking feedbacks, right? Now, essentially, when I was speaking to an entrepreneur and I kind of realized that the person is taking too much time of taking data also. And sometimes that's a double-edged sword, right? There's a perfect term for it in VC parlance. You call it as data paralysis, right? So when you talk about data paralysis just means that you're over-analyzing data, you're overemphasizing data, and you're just lost in the magic of words. You're not actually creating and solving a product or service. And sometimes that does not also help. So sometimes product is not always a numerical journey or a data journey also. It's a very customer facing journey. So it's a very personal and a very direct journey also. So all this loop has to be measured, has to be work in sync so that your time to market is reduced and you're launching the product at the right time.
Lovely. So, Aditya, you mentioned about 180-degree pivot and 360-degree pivot, right? So, 360-degree pivot, as you suggested, that it is changing altogether the entire course. And how can entrepreneurs strike a balance in such situations between pursuing their vision of the company and being adaptable to the market feedback and changing circumstances?
See, a lot of people try to over complex it and say that, okay, track this and this number and track this and this data. I have a very simple approach to it. We know nothing about our product or service because at the end of the day, customers are buying it, right? Essentially, what we are building is something not what we like. We are building something what they want, right? So when we are building for what they want, we can't take a lot of decisions on our own understanding and our own personal. In fact, that's the fourth problem that you have. If in a build, measure, learn feedback, you are basing your product development journey on your own assumptions or on your own preconceived notions, that is a perfect, that's what we call as a death valley for startups, right? So where 90% of the startups actually are not able to scale up. So that is why all this feedback on your product, all this pivot, decision of pivot, the idea, the essence lies in the hands of the customers. Our metric to track again here is revenue or a promise of revenue, right? If revenue is not driven into the company, no matter how much you say, that my customers might love my product, if they are not coming back to your platform or reordering again or reusing your service, that means they don't love it. They'll just say it in the front, in the face of you and lie at the back, right? So the North Star metric is in the hands of the customer.
Awesome. So talking about metrics, can you share some insights on how entrepreneurs can effectively measure and track the progress, or success is too early to say as a word, but progress of their startup using the metrics or key performance indicators? What would you suggest?
So every industry has a different KPI to track, right? And that is how we start our kind of investment. I start my investment call with. My very first question, of course, is on the founder. My second question is always on what is the metric you are tracking, right? Because that tells everything about the business. If, let's say, at this point of time, and that varies from stage to stage as well. If at a pre-seed level, you can't track a lot for, let's say, what effective is the customer retention. Because boss, you are at pre-seed, you're still about to sell the product. Customer retention eventually means when customer is ordering for the third or the fourth time, by definition. Does not mean that they are reordering just for the second time. That is not customer retention, right? That is a beginner's luck, what we say, right? So third or the fourth time is when the customer retention starts to kick in. So at the pre-seed level, we're not talking about customer retention. At the pre-seed level, we are just talking about your prototype journey. How have you tested out your thesis? When we move to a seed level, we then start talking about how are you acquiring a customer? What is the customer acquisition channel? And then we touch up briefly about what is the customer acquisition cost and how are you calculating it? Because customer acquisition cost is different for every business, right? Because some businesses have marketing, high marketing, some businesses have low marketing. For example, in EdTech, you have huge marketing costs. The average CAC is somewhere around 5,000 to 10,000 rupees. But when you move from an EdTech to, let's say, a D2C brand, the CAC comes slightly lower. When you move to a SaaS product, the CAC moves a bit high, but the LTV also moves along. So it varies from industry to industry. So then we're talking about what metric you're tracking. When you start at a series B, series A, series C, series D level, then we are talking about the practicality of these metrics, that what data you are fetching in and how the data is improving over time. Because then the question is about scalability. For the first 3 or 4 years, I'll track metrics which talk about sustainability, that whether this looks like a business or not, right? At a series A level, this would look like a business, and then VCs, larger VCs would track, can this become a scalable business? So that's.
Fantastic. You mentioned about the SaaS product companies and D2C companies. By far, the entrepreneurs in our network are broadly from that space. So we are having some questions in the audience. Please be assured that I'll be finishing my bunch of couple of more questions, and we'll be quickly jumping to the questions from the audience. Talking about revenues, we discussed in the earlier questions that in the very beginning stage of finding the product market fit, revenues are not the priority. However, some key considerations for startups when it comes to pricing their products or services in a way that aligns with the lean startup approach and also maximizes the revenue potential. What are your thoughts on it?
So that's been very well said, right? Because pricing is kind of another KPI to track in this whole process. And essentially at a at an early stage, the stage I invest in, right? Mostly what we are targeting about is pricing from two conventional points of view, right? Where when we are talking about market penetration, where we are saying that, okay, you set out a price, you test out the price, and then you move into different cohorts and different segments. Or either it's price skimming, where you take the top price in the market, sell it to the top customers, and then develop a subcategory version out of it, and then start selling it for lower category of customers, right? So at an early stage, we do have these conversations, but it's not like that we don't track revenue per se. We do ask questions on revenue because sustainability has to come in from revenue. If I'm giving funds to you, and if it's not driving revenue, that means that you're burning my capital on purely. And my burn could sustain you, whatever capital I give you at an early stage, my burn could max sustain you for 6 to 8 months only. After 6 to 8 months, you have to go out in the market again and raise capital. If you fail to do so, you will eventually be a strike down, right? So for me, revenue is if you are in early stages specifically, and as per the timing, because timing is, of course, in 2023, we're talking about a potential funding winter, and that is kind of already evident in terms of cash crunch and early stage deals barely getting 1/10 of funding they were getting last year, right? So essentially, my advice is to keep revenue as a metric which is close to your cost. So even if you're not breaking even, you're at least moving towards a path to profitability stage. And that path to profitability should come in the next 4, 5, 6 months, ideally. Should not take more than that. And my second thing is, when you're talking about pricing, when you're talking about all these data sets, start defining your metrics. Once you go back after the session today, just do one thing. On a list, on a page of paper, on a paper, write the top 20 metrics in your business and how and when would you track them, rank them in the order of priority and preference for them. And then envision your journey as to what metrics would fall. But start tracking data from today. A lot of startups, Amrit, actually fall in this trap, but they say, okay, I'm running a D2C brand. It's not about tracking data at all. It's just about selling to customers. But that's where you feel wrong. Because once you raise a Series A round, the investor would ask, what is the data you have maintained in the business? Are you actually making use of data and retargeting and repositioning to your customers? Are you actually taking notes of your data and taking active feedbacks from your customers? And then you would say, I don't have the answer to it, right? So that is when you can't actually raise larger rounds from VC because you don't have active customer data value. So no matter whatever business you are in, list down your top 20 metrics, start tracking your data from now on, start working on your data, and reach out to fellow entrepreneurs on how they track data. I read this phenomenal piece on LinkedIn a few days back by the Attenborough CBO, in which he listed down 10 mind maps of how they track data, right from cracking 100 crores in revenue just from Amazon itself, right, to tracking customers, to tracking Amazon ads, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, whatever. So start reaching out to other customers and start developing your cohorts and user retention journeys for your own set of customers.
Just repeating for the sake of audience so that you all can take a note of it. Attenborough in itself is a success story on selling the products on Amazon. Do look out on this post on LinkedIn by the CTO, right?
CBO, Chief Business Officer.
Chief Business Officer. Okay, yeah, CBO. All right. So, excellent suggestion. Thank you so much for that. The second last question that I have for you, two more to go. the feedback system, right? The customer feedback and insights. How can startup leverage that to continuously improve their products and services? And what are the tools that you would recommend or the strategies you would recommend to gather and analyze this feedback?
So, multitude of tools, I think, out there, thanks to AI also. AI has done a great job in terms of course, testing out multiple product feedback journeys and use cases. So, lot of, I think, one of my favorites to start with is when you're talking about customer outreach. I think Mailchimp does a great job out there. When you're then talking about, let's say, a customer capturing feedback capturing journey, I think there is SurveyMonkey has kind of done a great job at tracking customers and tracking basically what could sort of come in. For a lot of my other automation in terms of tracking customer ordering NPS, there's a tool called Zapier, which is basically end-to-end automation tool. So it does all the hard work for you in terms of getting your NPS from the customers and tracking basically in which cohorts and which geographies you are the most selling. So Zapier does a amazing job there. Then there is a whole bunch of e-commerce tools. So I think if you're mostly on e-commerce, since Gumroad, I think is a great tool to sort of look at that. Then when you're talking about more in terms of pricing, there's a tool called paritydeals.com, which does parity pricing. So it tells you that as respect to your customers and in respect to your competitors in the market, what should be the parity priced item of this product. So yeah, I think I can go on in tools and then just the last tool I'll mention, if you're capturing post customer journey, which is testimonials and feedback, I think testimonials.io is a great tool there to capture this. So yeah, I think that start using some of these tools and start tracking it from day zero.
Awesome. So obviously we'll be sharing this list of tools recommended by you with the community post the session. Also, my last question, taking all of this thing towards the teams, some thoughts on how startups can create a culture of innovation, experimentation, and continuous learning, with their teams to support the lean startup methodology.
Got it. So again, I think culture is kind of very important, because if people are not sticking with you, you can't actually build out a successful company. There's a great recommendation book that I have. It's called No Rules Rules by the founder of the CEO of Netflix, called Reed Hastings. It's written an amazing book on culture. So you can go and read that. But I think, in terms of innovation, it has to come from the leader, from the top management, right? Because in a team which is practically very small in early stage startups, just 3, 4, 5 people, right? The leader plays a very significant role in setting up the right culture. And be it right from things in terms of innovation, right? How you can actually have a smarter way of doing things, right? That is very important. So when I went to an office yesterday, in fact, I'll take this example, and I saw that the fans in the office were not open. Like it's too much heat outside. Why the fans are not open? And that's when I got that they were actually heat testing their machines, right, in the basement, and they did not want fans to be open. I think that sets the culture that you're actually. And I was actually, by disclaimer, an investor visiting it. They did not even open it for me. They took me to a separate room and they made me sat there, and then they sort of opened the fan room. So that sets the culture in terms of that you're willing to, of course, take all the stress and, of course, all the pain also, just to solve the customer problem, and just to have a culture in terms of saying that product innovation is the most important thing for us, and testing out the product in those environments. So if you can't go out, you don't have money, of course, to do a crash testing or a heat testing, you actually, how do you find innovation and do that at your own warehouse or at your own setup? I mean, that sets, so it has to come from the leadership, and it has to be constantly measured and talked about also, right? Innovation is just not felt. It has to be talked about, it has to be discussed, it has to be experimented and renewed every time.
Lovely. Excellent thoughts, Aditya. Thank you so much for sharing your views on these. And I'm sure this is going to go a long way, impacting the journeys of entrepreneurs. A few questions from the community. I think we have last 5 minutes for the Q&A. We are going to take up quickly and wrap up. So I would like to learn about prioritization of ideas/features while building a platform product. How do you go about doing that? How do you prioritize?
Okay. So first is to see in terms of a product roadmap journey. That's why we talk about that to our founders also, that develop a product roadmap journey, because your product will iterate and evolve multiple times over. Now, at every stage of your product journey, your product would solve one core fundamental problem, right? And at that step, you have to figure out that what is the core fundamental problem that is being solved by my product. Now, let's say if you develop a water cooler that could, let's say, cool other items also if you place in it. So it's like a water cooler come a refrigerator. But the first core problem is to, of course, provide water, right? So first develop your what is the core product or solution. Prioritize that. Then develop a customer roadmap journey or a product development journey basis the feedback that you want from customers. So when you go to your customers, you ask the first question, okay, this is what my product is going to solve. What next do you want this product to get solved? What other similar problems you have, right? And that's when you look for complementary problems and add it to the product development journey. So your first step is to solve that core problem, take it as a priority, and then move it along the way. And that's why we talk about a problem solution fit has to happen in startups. In respect of that, let's say your problem is this, but your solution is still not solving for that. That means that you're essentially not well positioning or well developing your product to the problem that you're solving. So that's why make out an analysis of problem and solution and whether you are actually solving the problem or not, right? And then take it in priority as to what my future roadmap journey could look like, right? So that's how it is. You should go out and sell it for a platform even.
So another question on the similar lines is, for software products, do you still recommend building the product by employing engineers or spending money on the MVP and then testing the hypothesis, or conducting market research before jumping into building the MVP? Your views?
So I think I personally believe in the second point of view, because see, we talk about engineering and tech, right? Engineering and tech also has to solve problem. It does not have to look fancy. That's what we talk about to our founders also, right? You can have the best UI UX application out there, but boss, if it's still not solving a problem, it's not value adding, I would not use it more than 2 times, right? I would probably uninstall the app because a sexy looking app would consume more space, right? So I believe in the second part, where you of course go out in the market, you know what your TG is, you go back to the basics and fundamentals, right? And then you start talking about more of what your customers want, and then sitting with the engineering team, sitting with the product development team, and then realizing that this is the kind of product that we want, right? Because engineers and tech and everything would definitely happen, but again, it's also an ever evolving journey, right? You would scale into multiple languages when you have a product. You would scale into different UI and UXs once you have multiple products. So A is to, of course, go to the market, identify your product or service, basis that, and then put your engineering brains behind it and develop the most easy looking application on that.
Lovely. The last question from the audience, Aditya, is we spoke in the session about one of the challenges that people face in implementing the lean startup principles is identifying the target audience and building a product in the early phase. But while testing or while doing the validation of the hypothesis, getting the wrong set of audience at hand, or how do you get the right audience, or how do you question your own audience that you have found out in the initial phase? Because again, it's not that you have found the audience, you have built a product. Again, the first set of audience that you have found could also be needed to be corrected. So going about selecting, understanding the right target audience, your thoughts on that?
I think great question. I was still reading this book called The CEO Factory by Sudhir Sitapati, who's now the CEO of Godrej Consumer Products, was started his journey with HUL. And it's a great book, as in, of course, just personally recommending, because it talks about customer journey a lot. And in fact, the chapter I was reading yesterday was a question to this. Now, HUL came out with a range of soaps, right? One was, of course, the detergent soaps, which was which was more for a working class audience, for a lesser class audience. There were a range of luxury soaps as well. They tried to launch. Now, when they were actually looking at the sales of their product or service, they were astonished to find that the premium products, that the luxury soaps were actually coming from places like Bihar, Jharkhand, Patna, Ranchi, Chhattisgarh. They looked at the data again to see if that was actually true. And then they found out that one of our TG is entirely wrong all this time. We thought that luxury soaps were only a selling piece for the luxury audience, people sitting in metros. But our sales were coming mostly from tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And even I was astonished to find out. And when they found out the reason, there was a beautiful line in this where they said that people in tier 2 and tier 3 cities actually don't plan their expenditure. They would splurge all their money like that on a luxury item and practically have no money at hand by the end of the month. Whereas people sitting in metros, since they have piles of cash sitting on them, they actually plan their expenses in a meticulous way. And since there are more overheads sitting on them, if the overheads come in early in the month, they practically don't have money again. So we have two people who don't have money by the end of the month, but the first one does not shy away from buying luxury at the start of the month. And that's how they were driving, the people in tier 2, tier 3 were driving most of the soap sales, right? So essentially, what we say is that whenever you're trying out a product or service, sell it to multiple tiers of audiences. Don't just sell it to one, right? Because you never know that other person actually has an interest or any other backstory in terms of buying the product or any other income proportion spending as well, right? Because now everybody has internet, everybody has that access to mobile phones and data, everybody has access to product knowledge and everything. So test your hypothesis to multiple sets of audience. Have a core audience which you think could become your TG. Plan out for your expenses for that core audience. Then have subsets of ancillary audiences which you're testing out your thesis. And then do a retention analysis of who is exactly responding to your product better. If the other customer segment is, then do a reverse engineering of this whole process and go back and start selling and start spending time to your different teams. So that's how you evolve and visualize. And that's why having a preconceived notion that whatever I have thought out right or whatever TG that I have thought is the correct one is sometimes not true as well. And that was beautifully displayed in the example by HUL.
Correct. So, I recently spoke about this thing on my LinkedIn post in the last week that talks about the founder's vision myopia. That talks about how entrepreneurs can often get a myopic view about what they are trying to do. It's not that the vision of our initiative is selling to a specific TG. It's okay to change the TG over time as you realize and as the market responds. And I think that's the value that I am taking away personally from here, and I'm sure other entrepreneurs as well in the session and on LinkedIn as well. Aditya, thank you so much. This session has been an immense value for all the entrepreneurs. On behalf of the entire community, once again, thank you so much. We would definitely look forward to engaging with you, more and more in the coming near future. And I'm sure that together we can spread an impact that can help us reduce the struggles and the failure rates of startups in India, which is, botheringly high. So thank you so much, Aditya. Any closing statements?
No, thanks a lot. I enjoyed. Thanks, Samanjika, and thanks, Amrit, for inviting me here. Truly enjoyed the session. I hope the others did as well, and I was able to add some value. And looking forward to more of such sessions and interacting. Anything for the community.
Lovely, Aditya.
Thank you,
Yes.
thank you so much,
Thank you,
Aditya,
Saranjika, for setting this up.
Yeah, thank you, Aditya, for accepting our request. And truly, I feel the session was a full of valuable session, and we have noted so many things, and would love to have more such sessions for our entrepreneurs community.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day.
Looking forward to connecting with you again, Aditya. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you. Everyone is done.